12, Charley Skedaddle, visitors. Coy McRae didn't fight the way Charley expected him to, like a real bare-knuckled champion would. He didn't come forward with his fists raised. Instead, he darted for Charley's legs and brought him down onto his face. Instantly, the mountain boy rolled away from Charley and then grabbed him by a flailing leg and turned him over onto his back. In another instant, Coy was straddling Charley, pinioning his arms and bouncing up and down on his stomach, knocking the air out of him. "I gotched ya! I gotched ya, witch boy!" he chanted as Charley thrashed his legs about and tried to free his arms. "Gotched ya good, I did, you outlander witch boy! I can spin your face whenever I wants to!" It was Granny Bent who stopped Charley's humiliation. She came up to Coy, grabbed him by his long hair, and gave him a swat across the side of his head. She cried at him, "My boy don't want mountain boy wrestling. Get up off of him, Coy. Get away from me, you pizen female. You get off my boy or I'll lay a spell on you so you'll never grow taller than you are right now and you won't never get what you want. Swallow your spit." While the old mountaineers chuckled, Coy got up reluctantly. Charley rose up quickly and looked shamefaced at Granny Bent, whose dark eyes raked his face. She told him, "Come along now, boy. Don't forget my coil jug." As he followed her, Charley heard the snickers of the old men and the call to his rescuer. "Your boy don't appear to be of much use, Jerusha. Can't talk and can't fight. Take him home and feed him up to be worth something." To Charley's relief, Jerusha Bent didn't pay any heed to what had been said. She swung up into Canaan and started away. Charley followed with the kerosene at the black mule's tail. It wasn't until they were out of sight of the settlement that the old woman halted. For a long moment she looked at Charley, and then she said, "You were aiming to fight him, wasn't you?" "Yes, but I didn't know he'd fight that way." "You do now, boy." Charley spoke bitterly. "Next time I'll move in first and hit him on the nose." "I think you will." "What'll be your reasons?" "Because I don't like the way he fights, and because of what he called me and you." "Reasons enough right there." She smiled crookedly, turned around and called back over her shoulder, "If that kerosene gets too heavy for you, put it on one of the Canaan saddlebags." "It won't get too heavy for me." And as they went uphill, Charley thought about what he'd heard from the war. He knew where Spotsylvania was from a map he'd seen in the Culpeper headquarters. It lay eastward and not far from the wilderness, so the two great armies were still in the state. He wondered who had won the last battle and who would win at this new one, Generals Grant and Meade, or the white-haired, bearded General Lee he'd seen atop the gray horse. That old man had been going right into the scrap. He had had the courage and plenty of it. Tears of shame came to Charley's eyes, making it hard for him to stumble in the ruts of the narrow road. Not to stumble in the ruts of the narrow road. He knew he'd cry again, too, but he vowed he would never weep in front of Granny Bent. July came in with a blaze of scarlet, purple, and gold wildflowers, so vivid that they took Charley's breath away. For sheer beauty, the mountains beat New York City. The various greens of the many trees, the brilliance of the stars as they sprang out of the darkening sky, and the bluish mist that clung to the slopes enchanted Charley in spite of his homesickness and the constant ache in his soul for deserting. Soon he began to recognize the calls of the mountain birds, the deer that came fearlessly to feed in the bent meadow of dusk filled him with awe. Granny Bent never shot an animal. One time, as he hunted yarbs with her, he spied a black bear sitting on a bald spot in a great hill, warming himself, his huge shaggy head lifted in the morning sun. The sight had delighted him. On the other hand, The venomous snakes, Granny Bent pointed out, had filled him with horror. She caught him once using the rosary the priest had given him at Culpeper, and she had listened as he explained it. And then she said, "I say there's power in prayer. Be careful what you pray for, boy. I aim to take you to church with me at the end of this month. A traveling preacher's coming, and there's to be a foot washing." Okay, boys and girls, a rosary is what the Catholics use to pray with, and it looks like this. These are two of my rosaries from both my grandmothers. This is a crystal one, and you say different prayers for each bead. So this is one that's an antique rosary, and here's another one, and this is actually from Jerusalem. And this one's made out of wood, and they can be made out of anything: clay, wood, glass. And for each step there's beads, or there's prayers. There's either a Hail Mary or an Our Father or an act of contrition. So these are called what, boys and girls? Rosaries, yes. While the old, ever mindful of the danger to him here in the hills, Charley obeyed Granny's orders not to speak when callers helloed the cabin and came for medicines or brought her game they had killed. He would go to the shed and sit with Canaan until they had gone, and then come out and go about his work. The third week in July, by his reckoning of time since the Battle of the Wilderness, the old woman was summoned to a birthing. A girl Charley's age came riding bareback on an old swayback mare to the house. Charley had been at the point of leaving for the shed when he'd heard her call out, "Granny, my sister's time's come. Can you come with me now?" "I'll fetch what I need, Sarah Giffen, saddle up my mule, and be with you as soon as I lock my boy in the hen house." Sarah Giffen had shining black curls and pale blue eyes. Her ragged dress had once been rose-colored calico, but was now gray. Her feet were dirty, but her ankles were milk white. She was the prettiest girl Charley had ever seen, and he just gawked at her. "Do you gotta lock 'em up, Granny?" asked the girl, staring at Charley. "I'll better. He might run off and get lost. Now come along, boy." As Charley went with her, he knew she meant to say, "run away," and he would too. Twice that day, Granny Ben had reminded him he was a coward and a deserter, and sometimes Charley thought he was almost starting to like her, and then she gave him the rough edge of her tongue, so he felt the same way toward her again. The hen house was just big enough for the hens to roost, and for him to lie down on the quilt she had given him before she locked the door with the big old metal lock. He couldn't squirm out of the hole the hens came in and out of because it was too small. He had to sit there with the corn, bread, and water until she came back. Granny Jerusha had left with the pretty girl at noon and didn't come back until daybreak the next morning. First of all, she let Charley out, and then she told him to look to Canaan in the shed. And Charley asked, "Was the baby a boy or a girl?" "Another boy. I heard it said in wartime lots of boys get birthed." Her eyes were cold. "He'll be some fool of a Willie to run off to war some day soon as he hears they're gathering soldiers. Men like war, and makes 'em feel big. There's nothing so bad it can't be talked out without fighting, but some do dote on fighting." Charley shook his head. He hadn't liked war at all. Not once he'd gotten a taste of it. Granny Bent repeated, eyeing him. "Oh, lots of 'em like it just fine. I reckon you did for a time. Think on it." And as he took Canaan to the shed, Charley did think. He'd been eager to fight and avenge Johnny.